If you live with type 2 diabetes, lunch is probably the meal that gives you the most trouble. A sandwich, a plate of rice, a bowl of pasta, and then that heavy, sleepy feeling that makes you want to sink into the couch. But here is something almost nobody has ever sat down and explained to you clearly. What you do in the 30 minutes after lunch can lower your blood sugar spike almost as much as a pill, and you don't need a prescription for it. My name is Dr. David Aid, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 7 things you can do right after lunch to bring your blood sugar back under control, with the actual science behind every single one of them. And the 7th one isn't even something you eat. It's a habit that takes less time than washing your dishes, and it may surprise you how powerful it really is. Before we get into it, the usual important reminder: nothing in this video replaces your medication or your doctor's guidance. Everything I'm about to share is meant to work alongside your treatment, not instead of it. Keep taking your medication, keep your appointments, and if you are on insulin or any medicine that lowers your blood sugar, talk to your doctor before adding things like vinegar or cinnamon in any meaningful amount, because they can stack on top of your medication's effect. Now, before I give you the 7 things, I want to take a moment to explain what is actually happening inside your body after you eat lunch. Because once you understand this, the rest of the video will make a lot more sense. Why the period after lunch matters so much. When you eat, especially when you eat carbohydrates, glucose rises in your bloodstream. In someone without diabetes, the pancreas responds quickly, insulin is released, and within an hour or two, blood sugar settles back down on its own. In a person with type 2 diabetes, that response is slower and weaker. So glucose climbs, and it stays elevated for far longer than it should. This is what doctors call the post-meal spike, or the postprandial spike. It simply means the rise in blood sugar that follows a meal. Most guidelines suggest staying under roughly 180 milligrams per deciliter 1 to 2 hours after you start eating. And yet, day after day, many people with diabetes sail right past that number, especially after lunch. Here is why that matters far beyond just a number on a glucose meter. Every time your blood sugar climbs too high after a meal, it causes small amounts of damage to the lining of your blood vessels and triggers a wave of inflammation throughout the body. Repeated day after day, year after year, these spikes are one of the major forces behind the long-term complications of diabetes: damage to the kidneys, the eyes, and the nerves. This is also why 2 people can have nearly identical A1C readings, that 3-month average number your doctor checks, and still end up with very different health outcomes. The person whose blood sugar rockets up to 220 after every meal and then drops back down is doing more harm to their blood vessels than the person whose blood sugar rises only gently and stays fairly level, even if their long-term averages look almost the same on paper. The spike itself, the sharp climb and the sharp fall, appears to cause harm on its own, separate from the average. That detail rarely gets explained, and it's exactly why what you do in that hour or two after lunch carries so much weight for your long-term health. The encouraging part is this: there are specific foods and specific actions that, when used right after lunch, blunt that spike. They work through different mechanisms in the body, and used together, the effect is more powerful than most people expect. Let's go through them one at a time. 1. Vinegar diluted in water. The first, and probably the most thoroughly researched of everything on this list, is plain vinegar, ideally apple cider vinegar, diluted in a glass of water. The active ingredient in vinegar is acetic acid, and it appears to do 2 helpful things after a meal. First, it slows down how quickly starch in your stomach breaks apart into glucose, so sugar enters your bloodstream more gradually instead of all at once. Second, it seems to encourage your muscles to pull more glucose out of the blood and put it to use. In studies where people drank diluted vinegar with or right after a meal, the post-meal glucose spike was reduced by as much as 30% in some cases. For something this inexpensive and this simple, that is a remarkable result, and it's been observed across more than one study, which is part of why I place it at the top of this list. But please pay close attention to how you use it, because the precautions matter just as much as the benefit. Never drink vinegar undiluted. It is acidic enough to irritate your throat, your esophagus, and the enamel on your teeth. Always mix it into a large glass of water, sip it through a straw if you can, and rinse your mouth with plain water afterward. If you have gastritis, an ulcer, or you take medication that already lowers your blood sugar, speak with your doctor before adding this. And to be clear, there is no version of vinegar that cures diabetes or replaces medication. It's a small, helpful addition, nothing more. How to actually use it. Stir 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar into a large glass of water and drink it shortly after finishing lunch. If this is new to you, start with half a tablespoon so your stomach has time to adjust. 2. Cinnamon. The second item is something many of you probably already have sitting in your kitchen cabinet. Cinnamon. A single teaspoon of cinnamon has a documented effect on blood sugar. It appears to help your cells respond better to insulin, and it slows the rate at which your stomach empties its contents into the small intestine, which in turn slows how quickly glucose from your meal reaches your bloodstream. Research consistently shows a modest but real improvement in blood sugar when cinnamon is consumed alongside carbohydrate-containing meals. The effect isn't dramatic on its own, but because cinnamon is cheap, safe in normal amounts, and effortless to add to food you're already eating, it earns a place on this list simply for being so practical. How to use it after lunch. Stir a teaspoon into a cup of unsweetened coffee, into a small bowl of plain yogurt, or dissolve it into a cup of warm water. One detail worth knowing. There are 2 common types of cinnamon, Ceylon and Cassia. Ceylon contains far less of a compound called coumarin, which in larger amounts can stress the liver over time. If you plan to use cinnamon daily, Ceylon is the safer long-term choice. The more common cassia cinnamon found in most grocery stores is fine in moderation, just not as a heavy daily habit over many years. 3. Plain Greek yogurt. The third item is a few spoonfuls of plain, unsweetened Greek yogurt eaten after lunch. Plain yogurt brings 2 things to the table: protein and probiotics. The protein slows down digestion overall, which softens the glucose spike from the meal you just ate. The probiotics, the beneficial bacteria living in the yogurt, support the health of your gut over time, and a healthier gut has been linked to better insulin sensitivity. In other words, a small cup of plain yogurt after lunch works almost like a dessert that, instead of raising your blood sugar, actually helps rein it in. The key word here is plain. Sweetened, flavored, fruit on the bottom yogurts work against you. The added sugar cancels out the protein benefit and simply adds another spike on top of the one from your lunch. So when you reach for yogurt, reach for the plain, unsweetened kind, and feel free to add your own cinnamon or a few berries if you want some flavor. 4. A small handful of nuts. The fourth item is a small handful of nuts. Walnuts, almonds, or pecans all work well. Nuts bring healthy fat, fiber, and magnesium together in one food. That combination slows the absorption of any carbohydrate still being digested from your lunch, and magnesium specifically plays a role in activating insulin receptors throughout your body. About an ounce, roughly a small handful, eaten after lunch helps extend your feeling of fullness and softens the spike that follows the meal. Just keep it to a small handful because nuts are calorie-dense, and more isn't better here. Here's a detail worth knowing. Magnesium deficiency is remarkably common among people with type 2 diabetes, and that deficiency itself tends to worsen insulin resistance, which becomes a bit of a frustrating cycle. A small handful of nuts after lunch is a simple way to start chipping away at that deficiency while also helping to blunt your glucose response. 2 benefits from one small habit. And while we're on this topic, if you really want to know how any of these 7 things affect your own body specifically, your glucometer is the most honest tool you have. Testing right before lunch and again about an hour afterward will tell you exactly how your body responds, because everyone is a little different. 5. Green tea. The 5th item is a cup of green tea after lunch. Green tea contains compounds called catechins, which appear to improve insulin sensitivity and also slow down how quickly carbohydrates are absorbed. A cup of unsweetened green tea after lunch gives you that benefit while also supporting digestion generally. It also carries a moderate amount of caffeine, just enough to help push back against that heavy, drowsy feeling many people get after lunch, without the jolt of a strong coffee. If caffeine doesn't agree with you, decaffeinated green tea still gives you the catechins without the stimulant effect. Many of my patients have told me that swapping their usual afternoon coffee or sweetened drink for a simple cup of green tea is one of the easiest changes they've made, mostly because it fits naturally into a moment that already exists in their day, right after the meal. 6. Bitter greens and leafy vegetables. The 6th item is bitter or leafy greens. Things like arugula, chicory, endive, or really any portion of green leafy vegetables, ideally eaten with or right after your main meal. Leafy greens are rich in fiber, and fiber forms a kind of gel inside your intestine that physically slows down how quickly glucose is absorbed into your blood. Bitter vegetables in particular contain compounds believed to support digestion and glucose metabolism. Adding a portion of greens to your lunch or right after it slows the speed at which sugar from rice, bread, or any starch reaches your bloodstream. This may be the simplest mechanism on the entire list, because fiber itself isn't digested and adds essentially no calories and no glucose of its own. But as it moves through your digestive tract, it slows everything happening around it, including the absorption of sugar from the rest of your meal. Think of it as adding a speed bump to your digestion at no cost to you. 7. A light walk, 10 to 15 minutes. And now, the seventh item, the one I told you isn't a food at all. A light walk, just 10 to 15 minutes, right after lunch. I know this sounds almost too simple to make a real difference, but the research behind it is genuinely strong. When you walk after eating, your muscles spring into action and begin pulling glucose directly out of your bloodstream to use as fuel. And here's the remarkable part. This happens largely without needing insulin at all. In other words, walking does part of the job that a struggling pancreas can't quite manage on its own. Research on people with blood sugar in the pre-diabetic range has shown meaningful improvement in glucose control simply from walking around 15 minutes 3 times a day after meals. A broader review of multiple studies confirmed that light activity after eating measurably reduces both glucose and insulin levels in the hours that follow. Consider what that means. Your muscles are the largest consumers of glucose anywhere in your body. At rest, they barely touch the sugar floating in your blood. But the moment they become active, even gently, they open up pathways that pull glucose out of circulation, bypassing the insulin system almost entirely. For someone whose insulin system isn't working as well as it should, that is an enormous gift. It's a way to clear sugar from the blood that doesn't depend on the very system that's struggling. It doesn't need to be intense. No gym clothes required. Washing dishes, tidying the house, walking the dog, or simply strolling down the block for 10 minutes all count. The one thing that matters most is this. Don't go straight from the table to the couch. And here's a detail that very few people ever hear. The ideal window for that walk is somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes after you finish eating, because that is almost exactly when your blood sugar begins its climb. If you walk during that window, you catch the spike right as it's starting and prevent it from climbing as high. You don't need to wait until your food is fully digested. In fact, waiting too long means missing the window when walking does the most good. 10 minutes of walking that starts about 15 minutes after lunch is worth more than 30 minutes of walking 2 hours later. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Walter, 68 years old, a retired firefighter. For years, his routine after lunch was simple. Eat, then settle into his recliner for a nap. His blood sugar an hour later was almost always above 200. We changed exactly one thing. Instead of heading straight to the recliner, he started walking 10 minutes down his street after lunch, along with a glass of water mixed with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. 2 weeks later, his post-lunch reading had dropped to around 150. He told me he genuinely hadn't believed that 10 minutes of walking could do something he thought only a pill could do. Then there's a patient I'll call Eleanor, 67, who loved having a small dessert after lunch. And that dessert was sending her blood sugar climbing every single day. Rather than removing it entirely, which tends to feel like punishment and rarely sticks, we replaced it with plain yogurt, a sprinkle of cinnamon, and a small handful of nuts. She kept her after-lunch ritual, just with ingredients that worked with her body instead of against it. Her numbers improved, and she never felt like she was being deprived of something she enjoyed. The order you eat matters too. There is one more piece of this puzzle that I consider just as important as anything else in this video, because it amplifies the effect of everything we've already covered, the order in which you eat your food. Research out of Weill Cornell Medicine found that when people ate their protein and vegetables first and saved the carbohydrate, the rice, the bread, the potato, for the very end of the meal, their blood sugar spike afterward was significantly smaller than when they ate the carbohydrate first. The remarkable part is that the food and the calories were exactly the same in both cases. Only the order changed, and that alone changed the outcome. Here's the likely reason why. When protein and fiber arrive in your stomach first, They form a kind of buffer. By the time the carbohydrate arrives, it's digested more slowly because there's already protein and fiber there, slowing the whole process down. The result is that sugar reaches your bloodstream more gradually, and the spike that follows is smaller. In practice, this means starting your lunch with your salad and your protein, and saving the rice, bread, or potato for last. You don't have to change a single thing about what's on your plate, just the order in which you eat it. I think of a patient I'll call Frances, 64 years old, who had no interest in changing her diet because she genuinely loved her meals exactly as they were. When I explained that she didn't need to remove anything, only eat her salad and protein before her starch, she agreed right away. Her post-lunch numbers improved consistently from that one adjustment without giving up a single bite of what she enjoyed. Sometimes, the most powerful change isn't what's on your plate, it's the order you eat it in. I want to clear up one more common habit: the after-lunch nap. Lying down immediately after eating doesn't burn glucose the way walking does, and it can also make reflux and digestion worse. If you genuinely enjoy resting after lunch, the better approach is simple. Walk for 10 minutes first, then rest. That way you still get the glucose benefit from moving your body during the window when it matters most, and you still get to enjoy your nap afterward. Rest was never the problem. Resting immediately, with no movement at all, right when glucose is climbing, is what works against you. And one more habit I see often: a glass of fruit juice with lunch, usually because it feels like the healthy choice. Even when it's completely natural, juice is rapidly absorbed sugar that piles directly on top of the carbohydrate already in your meal and pushes the spike even higher. A glass of orange juice with lunch can actually do more to raise your blood sugar than the rice sitting next to it. Swapping that juice for water and saving your green tea for afterward is one of the simplest changes you can make and one of the most overlooked. The bigger idea behind all of this: there's a deeper principle here that I want to leave you with, because it can genuinely change how you think about managing diabetes for the rest of your life. Most people believe that managing blood sugar is only about subtraction. Cut the sugar, cut the carbs, cut the foods you love. But the science of the post-meal spike points to something just as important: addition. Adding a short walk, adding diluted vinegar, adding fiber and protein first, adding the right foods after a meal. These additions give your body tools to handle the glucose it receives, rather than relying purely on trying to keep glucose out in the first place. That approach is more sustainable, more realistic, and frankly more effective over years and decades. Because here's the truth: you are going to eat lunch every single day for the rest of your life. You're going to share meals with family, eat at restaurants, celebrate birthdays and holidays. A plan built entirely on restriction tends to fail in the real world, because nobody can restrict forever. But a plan built on what you do after the meal, on tools that soften the spike, on the order you eat your food, that's a strategy you can carry with you into any meal, anywhere, for the rest of your life. That is what real, lasting blood sugar management looks like. Let's recap the 7 things to reach for after lunch. Diluted apple cider vinegar, which may reduce your spike by up to 30%. Cinnamon, which supports a better insulin response. Plain, unsweetened yogurt for the protein and probiotics. A small handful of nuts for healthy fat and magnesium. Green tea for the catechins that support insulin sensitivity. Bitter greens and leafy vegetables for the fiber that slows absorption. And the most powerful of them all, a light 10 to 15-minute walk, which lets your muscles pull glucose from your blood without needing insulin at all. The logic underneath all 7 is simple. After lunch, your body is about to receive a wave of glucose. Each of these, in its own way, either slows that wave down or helps your body put it to better use. You don't need to do all 7 every single day. Pick 2 or 3 that fit naturally into your life and stay consistent with them. Most people start noticing a real difference in their numbers within just a few weeks. If this video gave you something new to think about regarding what happens after lunch, share it with someone you know living with diabetes, especially if there's someone who heads straight for the couch after eating without realizing what that habit is doing to their blood sugar. If you found this helpful, please take a moment to like this video. It genuinely helps more people find it. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the health information we share every week, and leave a comment below. I read them, and I'd love to know which of these 7 changes you're going to try first. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, go ahead and share it with them. I'm Dr. David Aid, and I'll see you in the next video.